Hello, my friends, and welcome to the podcast. Today we have Caolan Robertson, who is doing a fantastic journalist job out there in Ukraine. Caolan, hello.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's really cool to be on this channel. I've been watching it for years.
Caolan, I just watched your masterpiece video. Then you went to the front lines. I really enjoyed those videos. Then journalists, they're filming the situation as it is from the front lines or at the edge of the front lines. Your video, it shows that it is changing. Yeah, the situation in Ukraine, it is changing. The perception is changing. It was a little more pessimistic than the last time I saw your report. Tell us, like in general, in a couple of words about your job there, your journalist job, and how maybe your perception also changed. Just a couple of words. And I'm going to put the link for your original video in a video description here right below for guys to check out your masterpiece work.
Okay, cool. No, thanks. I mean, this was a difficult report to make, and it's not something I expected to find once I got to Kramatorsk, but I've been filming in the Donbass since 2023, and before that, since 2019, I've been making videos with Serena Zabriskie, countering Russian disinformation and talking about Russian money in London and in British politics. So I've been covering Russian influence for years now, but since the full-scale invasion, that's when I started to come to Ukraine. I would come to Kyiv and then went to the Donbass and basically moved here full-time just to do it around the clock. I was working for an organization called Byline back then, which was great. I was running the TV department, but I couldn't be fully here full time in Ukraine. And I think to fully understand exactly what's going on in the country, you kind of have to, especially in areas like the front line, visit really, really frequently. So I left that job and now I just do this full time. For every month I've gone to a different frontline area, whether that's a place like Kherson or on the border of Sumy when I went to Suja, or on this trip, the Donbass. And every time there's been a really kind of optimistic stream throughout everything. In 2023, places like Izium had just been liberated. Early 2023, Kherson had been liberated. And there was this feeling that the Russians would keep on being pushed back. That stopped, but there was still a hope that at least Ukraine would hold on enough time for the Russian army to be depleted or some sort of peace to come. And for the first time on this trip, there was almost no optimism in the political sense. Everybody was exhausted. Everybody was bringing up the political scandals that have been coming out, the corruption scandals that have been coming out. And off camera, a lot of soldiers were saying, and I completely understand why they don't want to say it on camera, that they're hearing that the mobilization issues are really difficult with circulations, with the type of people that are being mobilized. Sometimes some of them are not really fit health wise for service, and so it's discouraging a lot of people from volunteering. Now, everyone I spoke to in the Donbass volunteered to fight. None of these people were mobilized. They're doing it because they love Ukraine and want to defend their country. But that was just one aspect of it that was getting people down, and this is something the Ukrainian government could quite easily fix with internal overhauls. But that was one thread throughout the whole thing. And I'm telling you this now because I couldn't say it in the documentary. A lot of people wouldn't say that on camera, but that is the reality. And then the second part was that the Russians, despite being a mess, disorganized, behaving like a bunch of Mad Max lunatics, are still throwing everything they can at it, and they're still making progress. Even if it's a field a day, even if it's half a village a day, especially with the fog, they're advancing in a way I've never seen before, not at a rate like that. In 2023, when I was filming evacuations from the east of Bakhmut, that I remember when that city fell, and then that front line almost stabilized for a long time. I filmed in Siversk, north of that city in 2023, and that was one of the most held parts of the front line for the last 3 years. And on this last trip, it's the first time I've worn body armor to go from Kharkiv to Sloviansk on that road, because they're coming through Liman and they're 20 kilometers away and they're hitting it with FPVs. And the Russians have apparently entered Siversk, and you could feel and hear a difference. And I was staying in Lviv and Kramatorsk at this time. You could hear it so much louder, so much closer, artillery coming in and out. They hit the market there. They started to sort of empty out all the cities like they did before they took Bakhmut at a much faster rate. And it felt like things are deteriorating now much more rapidly than there were before. And that's not the whole story as well. Everyone, again, who I interviewed who was fighting there still told me they're doing it because they love their country. They come from Dnipro, Zaporizhia, different regions where they know if the front line isn't stopped here, the Russians are going to keep going. They're going to keep going until they take all of Ukraine. And the only way to stop that is to hold them where they are and stop them at the Donbass. And they're still incredibly motivated to do that. But there is a difference now, and it's difficult, and politically as well. A lot of the soldiers aren't following what's happening with Witkoff, the meetings, any of these things. But watching that from my perspective, that feels like a really difficult time as well, because it feels like the US is done with helping Ukraine in any format. Not US citizens, but Donald Trump's administration. That it really was a difficult report to make. And I think that was important to include in the film. I guess you saw that theme as well, just people being exhausted, people being tired, but carrying on. And the soldiers want people to know that. They also don't want politicians and members of parliament watching videos coming out of Ukraine saying, we're still holding on, everything's fine, and think, okay, well, the Ukrainians are all right. Maybe they don't really need as much support. Maybe they don't need as much weapons. Maybe they don't need as much aid. You know, I saw a video recently where they're fighting back. They took a village back. It's fine. They're like, no, the situation is really critical. It's more chaotic and critical now than it ever has been before. And Ukraine needs as much support as possible right now, and some internal overhauls. So it's just, honestly, after visiting here for 3 years, it's the first time I've really seen it so visceral and so difficult now, which is why I put the report together like that. But it's a really tough time. I'm going to go to Zaporizhia in a week or so, because the Russians are 20 kilometers from there now. They just advanced in a village south of this, you know this, and that puts the whole city within range of FPVs. Apparently there was a sleeper fiber optic drone outside Kramatorsk train station a few days ago. This is going to start happening, what is happening in Kherson, in Kramatorsk, and Zaporizhia, I think. So I think that the next few months are going to be extremely difficult in these places, more than we've ever seen before, for civilians and for the forces.
Yeah, I understand. Caolan, thank you. I understand that you, as a journalist, you have to face two of those issues, yeah? To tell like the real picture as it is, and at the same time, for not to have your material to be used by pro-Russian propagandists and, you know, to undermine the Ukrainian interest. I also face in my videos with that. Tell me, Caolan, you just got married like a couple of weeks ago, I guess. You're still like very young. And what drives you in this trip? Like why you decided to leave Europe, go risking your life literally out there close to the front lines? Because we know that Russia mostly now focused on targeting Ukrainian drone positions, Ukrainian drone operators, and there are more losses than the last year. They have also like very capable drone units. So why are you doing? What drives you, like motivates you for producing this piece of journalism, almost right from the front lines?
I've always loved making documentaries and films about subjects that a lot of people don't know about. Even since I was a kid, since I was 12, I got a video camera. I was always making films at school and showing them to the class about just interesting stuff that I always loved. And for a byline, I was doing this about people that voted for Brexit and regretted it. Steel workers, manufacturing, oil refining, people that worked in industries, fishing, that voted for Brexit. They felt like they were betrayed and regretted it. And this was a huge series that I did. And just telling people's stories about government corruption as well in the UK. We did this with the procurement scandal with COVID. And I loved telling stories that people don't want you to hear about, like the Russians, or in Britain, it was the same thing, exposing scandals. And with John Sweeney, before the full-scale invasion in 2020, we went to Perugia and went to the Palazzo Terranova. This was a house owned by the Lebedevs, and we did a whole investigation into how Boris Johnson went there and how they're trying to get, information about British politicians for compromising material. And that's a story that Russians don't want people to know about. That's a hidden story. And I love bringing these to surface. And I happen to be really good at filming and editing and storytelling. So it just works really, really well to be able to do this. So when the full-scale invasion happened, and a few months after when I first arrived in Ukraine, I had a really strange just feeling. I arrived on Valentine's Day 2023, 12 months into the full-scale invasion. And I came out of the train station expecting bleak, horrendous environments, people being angry, miserable. But there were people selling flowers outside of bags of sandbags. I literally took out my camera within an hour of arriving and asked people down the Andrivsky descent and down in Podil why they're still celebrating love despite there being a war. And they were saying, because love is victory, because love is how we survive. And people were lovely. I went to a restaurant, everyone was so nice to me. John Sweeney and I were just talking to so many people in Kyiv. And I'd never been to Ukraine before. And my first impression was this place is beautiful and amazing. Physically, it's beautiful. I love Padil, love these areas, but there was a feeling there that I will never forget. And it was just, I really want to be here and I really want to report this and film this. Because if I didn't even realize this is what Ukraine was, this is the feeling in Ukraine after 12 months of news coverage, then so many other people have no idea. And I called all my friends back home. I called my parents. I was like, this is what Ukraine is really like. I went to the Donbass. And when I first reported on white phosphorus being used, rained down over Konstantinivka, when we reported just after the liberation of Kherson on the torture that locals and civilians had to go through under the chambers of that city, I remember telling people in journalism back in London, this is happening in Ukraine. And they were shocked. They didn't even really know the extent of what Russians were doing to the people in this country. I think a lot of people just thought it was two armies battling it out. You know, it was the Ukrainian army and the Russian army, and they're at lockheads. They didn't realize that Russians were hitting everything alive here, civilians, hospitals, all of it. And so I was like, I felt like the media had made a huge error. They had focused just on the numbers of missiles coming into the country, just on the death toll. They hadn't focused on what was happening to people every single day. So I went back to London and I just felt like all my work for the next few months, you know, covering day-to-day news, day-to-day politics was pointless compared to what we had covered, what we were covering here. And that film that I brought out in 2023, it won 12 awards around the world. It was being played at film festivals, and it really highlighted the war crimes that Russia was doing to civilians here. So after that, I just decided I wanted to come here full time, which was 2024, left that job and just go for it. I started a Patreon and I used all my savings to buy a new camera, pay rent for 6 months, and said, I'm just going to go for it and spend every single day reporting on everything I'm finding. And people seem to like the reports, and they're having really good impact. I think a few 100 million views last year of just places in Kherson that I had filmed, places all across Ukraine, exposing what's happening. And when I went to Kherson and documented the human safari with Serena Zabriskie, this was super risky. I was living in Odessa at the time. I had absolutely no money left. So I was like, I don't even know how to frontline report. And she just told me to get a $5 bus there. Arrived there on the bus and just started filming. And this was what was hunted in Kherson. Filmed these drones hovering above. And that video went viral. It had 3 million views. And I think it was 3 days later, the Washington Post and 2 other news networks went to that city and tried to interview the same people that were in that film. And so it caused a wave of mainstream media going there to then cover it. And I realized I could have a really big influence on getting more coverage of things that are happening in Ukraine that people don't know about in the rest of the world. So that is extremely motivating. And that made me it's the reason I kind of edit 15, 16 hours a day sometimes, or just go 100 miles an hour without stopping. Because if you can feel a real world impact like this, and you can actually expose something that's happening that a tiny fraction of society knew about, that people on the ground who are desperate for the world to know, it's the most gratifying, amazing feeling in the world. And so that's, I think, what makes it easier to take the risks as well, right? I mean, it's also an aspect. Every single time you go to the front, you know, you get more used to hearing explosions and more used to hearing these environments and hearing drones. And so, you know, the 5th time you hear it isn't as scary as the first time you hear it. So there's more of a desensitization, but it's just so motivating. And yeah, so I got married last week, and I made a video saying I fell in love with Ukraine at that train station in 2023. And then I fell in love in Ukraine because that's just kind of how it works. This is like the city of love in Kyiv in a lot of ways. Everyone's always holding hands, walking down the street. And yeah, we got married exactly 1 year after the day that we met. So that was really cool. And to do it in Kyiv as well, my whole family came over. Sean Pinner was there, John Sweeney, everyone from kind of journalism backgrounds was all there, Paul Conroy. It was a really beautiful moment of just light in all of this darkness, just a moment to remember to celebrate love. And it was really beautiful. So yeah, it's just everything that I've done since I moved here feels right in a lot of ways. Like the stories, when they get released, get the impact that they need. And I don't know, just things fall into place in a really strange way. But I'm motivated by that more than ever. And that's why I made this last film. That's why I'm going to go to Zaporizhia again in a couple of weeks and just keep going. But it's been a long ride.
Yeah, Caolan. So just to clarify, you're an independent journalist. You work for yourself. Just your Patreon support drives you, and maybe some YouTube monetization. That's it. We live in this material world. Yeah, we need the funds. So no one is sponsoring you except your viewers from what I understand.
I've had lots of people reach out to sponsor, like VPN companies, loads of stuff. But I always believe, I mean, even in the early days, back when I first moved here, and I was really worried if I would even be able to pay rent for one of the months, I was offered jobs with Ukrainian television networks with different outlets. And I remember turning it down because I thought, in the long term, if I'm fully transparent about every single income source, you can see how many Patreons I have, you can see how many views I get on YouTube a month, and you can kind of roughly see how much it is. That is the point of what I'm doing. The point of what I'm doing is to combat Russian disinformation and to also combat shady funding networks of these kind of these kind of organizations. You know, CNN, who have been bought by a shady billionaire recently, who are now moving a lot of their headquarters to Qatar, who are now platforming Alexander Dugin, who are now saying that civilians are claiming to be hunted by civilians in Kherson, are doing that because they have shady investors. So I've always been totally transparent about my income sources. It's Patreon and it's YouTube ad revenue. If you want to make a one-off donation, sure, you can do that. You can do it on a PayPal, but everything is transparent because that is the point of truth telling. Is you need to know where someone, if someone is being paid to say what they're being paid. And a lot of people don't believe me because they're like, how can you be so pro-Ukraine and still make positive reports without someone giving you some, you know, envelope full of cash? You know, Zelensky coming around the apartment and giving you some cash. And it's like, because what I'm doing feels like it's on the side of good, and it's genuinely motivating to tell these stories, and that's it. But I always
it's mostly happening on the Russian side with all of those paid. Like there was the scandal, I think, in United Kingdom. Then Nigel Farage's friend was arrested and even jailed, for taking the bribes from the Russian. I don't remember the name of this politician, but he was also in the European Parliament saying like pro-Russian narratives. He was receiving the money from Medvedchuk, who is the close Russian Putin's friend. Even there was the big scandal like published, I think, on BBC. I think it was published. Well, doesn't like he was uncovered like fully WhatsApp messages. He forgot to delete those. By the way, it was found in United States. Then they searched his phone, and he was jailed for 10 years. For that, and also with the recent Twitter gate location gate that was uncovered, all of the influencers, also from MAGA or pro-Russian influencers, they were from India and other countries, basically bots.
Yeah, but this started at the Tenet Media scandal as well, if you remember, in 2024. Tim Pool, all of these different accounts, $10 million funneled. Margarita Simonyan did that. That was Nathan Gill you're talking about. He was an MEP, members of European Parliament. It seems like there's a lot of MEPs in the European Parliament who are dodgy Russian affiliated. I've had my own experience with those people, but the Russians are completely infiltrated all of our politics. And Nathan Gill, one of the reasons I'm good at understanding how this stuff works is before I was with Byline, way back 7 or 8 years ago, my first job was with Rebel Media, and this was a right-wing news outlet because I was critical of Islam back then. I was kind of one of these free speech warrior type people, and so I worked with some of these people for about a year. I had met Nathan Gill, who's now in jail. I had met some of these people, and I had a feeling. And we were invited on a paid trip through one of my jobs to Moscow. I didn't go to interview Dugin, and I remember thinking, okay, well, who's paying for that?
You missed your opportunity, Caolan.
I was like, why would I do that? And I remember that's the reason I left, because I was like, this is really dodgy. I just came here to talk about like free speech and this and this and this. So I exposed a lot of these people in the news. I exposed a lot of people I worked with their funding with The Independent and the New York Times. And then when I left, I was like, I had an understanding of how it works. So now when you see Sasha Meets Russia, you see people like this all the time. That's why I'm quite good at combating them. People like Phidias, people like Nick Shirley, because I had for a brief period actually existed in that world. So I know how they think. It's a bit like how Bill Browder used to work with people like Putin, right? They know how they think and they know how it works. So yeah, it's really, really bad though. I mean, the influence is out of control.
Yeah, so, I was surprised to watch videos about you, and I think there was also your response from about Roman, who is so-called Russian oppositioner, who lives in Portugal. You had some of the beef with him, and he definitely called you a grifter. Like, how can you be a grifter if you just have like sponsorship from YouTube, from your Patreon supporters? Like, that guy is nuts, because you're doing very great job supporting Ukraine and telling the stories how it is like. And that guy, I didn't understand it, and I listened to your reply. It was interesting. Yeah.
It was a quick reply because I think a lot of Russians who are anti-war get quite triggered when I talk about them, because I say, this person is very anti-war but hasn't really made videos about anything that's happened that his country's committed, things like Bucha, things that are happening in Ukraine. And when I said a lot of them are only anti-war because their lives have become more personally difficult, they can't get YouTube ad revenue, they can't get sponsorships, I think it hits a nerve. And it's, it makes them annoyed. So I think that's why he did that. He said, I didn't know where Ukraine was before 2024. I've been making videos about Russian disinformation for 6 years. So I think it was just a hit piece to try and sort of be an avenue for his anger. But I think... I don't think many people took that very seriously. I've never hid anything about my past as well. I've talked very openly about how for a year I worked with right-wingers, and how it gave me an insight into how this stuff works. It's nothing to hide about that. But Roman can do Roman. He can do his own thing. That's great. I think it's great that he lives in Portugal and he has a nice life there. I think I'm so happy for him. Yeah.
I see, Caolan. Caolan, one more personal question, if you want to answer. So you have your not traditional marriage in Ukraine. I didn't know it was possible legally, but it seems like it is. Ukraine is, after all, this Eastern European country with post-Soviet heritage, and also those kind of the attitude, sometimes harsh to LGBT people. And do you feel any pressure out there in Ukraine for you, personally? Maybe some comments, maybe even from the guys who are fighting there on the front lines. I know that there are some of them, far-right guys, even in the Ukrainian army. So what was your personal experience? Did you receive any sort of the pressure? Tell us your attitude about the Russian propaganda relative to that, because they also sometimes say that they are fighting against LGBT in Ukraine. So they even build a part of their philosophy on that one. So, if you're willing, you can tell.
Yeah, so it's not legal in this country for two guys to get married. So we had the papers done in the United Kingdom because this person, he's a British citizen. But we had the ceremony here, and John Sweeney did the vows, and it was very, very cool and very lovely. We did it in a very traditional kind of way, where it was a very, very lovely ceremony.
I don't know, because I saw some of the photos, our Ukrainian soldier also married another guy. It was spread also on Twitter, I think it was also 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago. So yeah,
it was a day after I posted the video saying I was getting married, and I think it was just kind of in the same week. It was a proposal in Maidan. So, but I imagine they will just go to another country, get it signed, and then have a ceremony here. But I was worried about that when I first came here. I was worried that if I came across as too camp, or if they thought I might notice that I was gay, that I might have been talked too badly or treated badly, especially by working class Ukrainians who are fighting in trenches. Right, this is in Britain, the only time when you see a lot of homophobia, it's usually in more working class areas like Sunderland, places that are a bit more industrial. But it genuinely hasn't happened. And all these soldiers that I'm filming with follow me on Instagram. They know exactly what they know about that wedding. And I think from what I felt in this country is that Ukrainians judge you based on your behavior, your attitude. If you're a good person, if you've got good humor, they'll kind of take you at face value. And if they think you're a good person in the first minute or so of chatting to you and your intentions are good, then they say, all right, fine, I don't care about what else you're doing. That's kind of the response I've had. I've never had anything said to me in the street, never had anything negatively said to me by a soldier, never experienced it. And I've always been fairly open about it. I don't talk about it because I don't like to be one of those people that are make it your personality. I actually don't really think about it very often. It's been interesting. So this country, I find, it judges people based on just who they are at face value. And any of the anti-LGBT protests that I've seen happening in Kyiv, there was a big one outside screening in the cinema in Badil recently. The networks on Telegram that organize these are Russian-linked networks, or Belarusian networks. A lot of them are Russian attitudes, because intolerance in Ukraine and homophobia and things like that seem to have come from a Russian mentality that infiltrated this country for a huge amount of time. Russia's the most homophobic, racist country in this region of the world. Just look at any of the polls and attitudes of asking Russians if they'd want to have a black neighbor or not. It's like 89% say no. That is intolerance is a Russian attitude. And Ukraine, I don't know whether it's happened since the full-scale invasion, but it feels like a really liberal country to live in. Genuinely, if I had experienced it, I'd talk about it, but I just haven't. And it's been pretty surprising because I thought it would be, just like cold, harsh Eastern European, like really kind of mean, but it's just not at all. People are surprisingly lovely. The only abuse I get whenever I posted about the wedding stuff is usually Russians saying, you see, Ukraine is an LGBT homo globo, blah, 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 blah. And then they also say that we're a Nazi country, so that this is a Nazi country. So it's like, which is it? Is it like gays and everyone's happy and everyone's getting married? Or is it like Nazis and they're fascists? Like, could we please make up our minds? What's going on here?
They say that's what you're dying for. Like, look at those photos, look at those like gay marriages. But in a way, like it is correct. I mean, this is total freedom. I mean, Ukraine chose this direction a long time ago. That's why there were some of the revolutions happening in 2004, 2014. And basically this revolution is now still ongoing now, but now against the external influence. So I think every person like should have like this freedom if it doesn't jeopardize someone's safety, security, or like threaten someone. Like, come on. We are free to we are living like a human beings here, so we are free to love whoever we like to love. So that's my attitude towards that stuff. Yeah, I have also the friends from LGBT community. They're okay, like usual guys. So it's just love. Like, how can you forbid someone to love someone? But statistically, they also have this LGBT, like in every sort of the country, even in Saudi Arabia. But they just sometimes even flatline those people. Happens.
Yeah, I mean, the more you repress it as well, the more. I mean, the countries where it's illegal are the countries where you have the highest rates of male-on-male rape and search results, search rankings. Google search results released all the countries in the world for LGBT porn, and it was like in Saudi Arabia, in Russia, like in all the countries where they clamp down on it. So it still exists everywhere, but in Ukraine, it's just like So it's an interesting thing. Again, I don't really think about it very often because it's not. I don't even think of it as really part of my personality.
Yeah,
but
it's just what's interesting for me because you have experience in being in Ukraine, and some people like call Ukraine a Nazi country, also a homophobic country. There is no difference between Ukraine and Russia. What are you talking about? This is like some experts say. A civil war, like there is no difference between Ukraine and Russia, and Ukraine is basically the other post-Soviet country that should accept its Soviet heritage and join this Russian community. Then, in fact, we're different. We're pretty much different. Caolan, going back to your movie. So there are some of the changes on the front lines. You say that the pace of the Russian army continues, but you also say that there is the chance for Ukraine to like exhaust Russian army. But at the same time, we know that Russia has potential resource, human resource, could be millions of people, which they might conscript, mobilize at any moment. So what do you think about this potential threat? Like, can Russia continue this war? Tell us your thoughts. Can Russia continue it for years and years, or there will be soon some point then Ukraine has perspective to stop Russian aggression? Because you spoke also with people on the front lines.
Yeah, there's only two outcomes that will fix this situation. One is Europe realizing the Russian threat immediately now and having a drastic difference in their mentality towards Russia, arming Ukraine 5 times what they're doing now and giving it 5 times more money, not bickering about frozen Russian assets like they were doing yesterday, whether it's legal or not to even give them to Ukraine, is 200 billion, but doing it now. That would cause a huge impact on Russia that would slow things down drastically and give Ukraine the upper hand. The second is for Ukraine to continue the long-range strikes. That's the only way I see it, into Crimea, into Russia, hitting Russian refineries, hitting them at the oil exports, hitting these ships, that are coming out of the Black Sea carrying Russian oil. If oil tankers can't get insured to take oil out of Russia, if captains don't want to drive boats because they're worried that they'll be hit by drones, they're not going to ship that Russian oil that fuels the war machine. That is the only way this ends. If things continue as they are right now, without those two things happening, without Ukraine intensifying those attacks and bankrupting Russia or the European Union 500 times more helping Ukraine, then very, very, very slowly, Russia will just keep mobilizing. They can carry on like the way they are for years. They can keep going, and they can go all the way. I mean, I read a report recently saying they can get all the way to Dnipro, Zaporizhia, basically the whole of the Dnipro River, but it would take 5 years. Russia will do that for 5 more years. They've been doing it for 4. They'll do it for another 4. And that isn't something to rejoice about. You know, I was listening to Times Radio the other day, and the commentators were saying, oh, it would take 4 years for Putin to get here. This is completely unsustainable. Well, they have been doing it for 4 years. And just because it's going to happen in 2028 or 2029 doesn't mean that's not horrendous for Ukraine. So it should be taken really, really seriously. I don't really like these reports about Russia collapsing in the next 2 seconds. It's not helpful. But the long-range strikes will do it. I just went to the Aegean Islands. I went to an island called Lesbos in Greece, and I was tracking Russian ships coming past. This is a film that I'm editing right now. And I was doing all the figures about how much money these ships are actually transporting, the Russian oil machine. And it's hundreds of billions, and it's Russia's main and basically only source of income. They don't really export anything else other than terrorism and propaganda. And if that slows down and stops, then the front line freezes. Soldiers' salaries might not be paid on time. Things stop. Russians will only do things if they're bribed or paid to do them. They're not going to fight and volunteer like the Ukrainians are to steal another land. So that's the best strategy. And I think it's possible. This country have increased the production of Flamingo missiles. They've increased the production of their long-range missiles, and it looks like Europe are going to be helping them with that. If they keep doing that strategy, I'm very hopeful for this country. I don't think that, Ukrainians are going to be able to walk back into Mariupol anytime soon or walk back into occupied territories, but at least the front line can be frozen and things can stop at that point. And then when it does freeze, for Ukraine to carry on hitting Russia. Russia's economy is the size of Italy's. It's not that big. And if its only export is oil and you hit the oil, it's going to stop. And they're already, going into their reserves, their gold reserves. Russian citizens are already going through a huge amount of chaos. But again, I make a lot of videos. I had 2 million views a couple of months ago talking about how Russian, society is under huge pressure right now. People are getting fed up. That doesn't mean they're going to protest it. Russians are happy to live in squalor, as far as I can see. They're happy to live back in the good old Soviet days, as they see it. In almost some ways, they glamorize struggling, and they glamorize not being able to afford bread and this and that. It's about the people, and it's about this fight, this enemy, and they're happy to adapt to that. Russians are happy at all levels of society to adapt to that, even though it's an interesting thing to talk about. So Russia is happy to bring itself back to not just the Soviet days, but the Stone Age for its population until Putin delivers what he promised his people, which is the whole of Ukraine, unless it's stopped economically. That's honestly the only scenario I can see working in this.
Thank you. Yeah, about Russian people, I'm honestly very surprised, because even during the Soviet times, then there was the war in Afghanistan, there were way less losses, way. Like Russia for a couple of weeks loses the same amount of the soldiers as they lost in Afghanistan for entire 10 years. And there were protests actually happening. There were, they called Mothers of the Soldiers. They created groups, even without any access to internet, without anything. They created the movement that was influential. And because of the Afghanistan war, it was one of the factors for the Soviet Union to collapse. But here, 1 million losses, totally cancelled and wounded altogether. 1 million, and Russian society is still okay. They live like it is happening somewhere in a distance for them mainly. Maybe because they did this volunteer program for Russian soldiers. It's your choice. You want millions, you go, and maybe because of that, Russian society is okay. And maybe if Putin announces a new mobilization and takes conscripts, as it was in Chechen war, maybe that will start to influence them. But for now, there is like almost no reaction, and they're quite okay living in that. And Putin, he also, he was born in 50s. So he understood how people may struggle in the Soviet times, in the 80s, after the Soviet era, in 90s. So he understand, like now Russians, they live not that bad as at the beginning of 90s or in 80s in Soviet Union with all of the deficit. Still, they have cooperation with China, and other world helps them. Like, for example, today, whether he's still in India, I mean, Putin himself, he opens the Russia Today broadcast propaganda in India, and India is pretty much okay to open minds of their people, like more than 1 billion people, to consume that bullshit. But it is happening like that. So still they have like support from those other countries, and that's what drives them. And Putin thinks that he might continue. And also he's very well accepted in even some of the Western countries with the red carpet, and that encourages him to continue this war. Unfortunately, it might continue for many years. And we live in this timeline, and then Europe spends more money purchasing Russian fossil fuels than helping Ukraine. And Europe still thinks that it cares more about whether taxpayers will pay more taxes, like few percent, or maybe the prices in the grocery stores will go up by 5%. They're more interested in that than to helping Ukraine fully. But they, I guess, have no other choice, because just yesterday I got the report about Germany that young people, they're going on protests because they don't want to take part in the future war against Russia or something like that, like thousands of those. Yeah, basically it's fueled by pro-Russian groups that they go on protests, but they just start to talk about the possible conscription in the future in case of something happens. And they went on protests. Like, without Ukraine, I think Europe is not ready for this full-scale confrontation with Russia. Also, without military experience, without drone army, without motivation. There were the polls saying that in Germany, just 16% of the people, they are willing to defend their country just in case. And the war is not there. If Russia comes, it will be less, maybe. It's very hard, Caolan, really, to watch what is happening.
Yeah, like look how Poland dealt with 16 drones in its airspace. It had to scramble fighter jets. It could barely even intercept them. That's 16. This country gets between 5 and 1,000 sometimes a night. Europe has no idea how to do any kind of self-defense at all. But propaganda is the reason that people don't want their taxes increased. If every European country doubled their spending to Ukraine, it would end this immediately. Russia wouldn't be able to cope with the with Ukraine being supported with those numbers, which would be a difference of between like 0.3 and 0.6% GDP of each country, which is what is being spent on this, which is nothing to stop a country that's doing a hybrid war against you. But what happens is whenever anyone talks about Ukraine spending, especially in Britain, TV pundits and people I believe are paid by Russian propaganda immediately talk about Ukraine. They immediately talk about the reason you can't heat your homes, the reason that the streets are dirty, the reasons that the street lights aren't on, the reason we've got homelessness is because we're sending our money to Ukraine, despite it being 0.3% of our money, which is nothing. But the mothers of Russia that stopped the protest of the Afghan war, I remember tracking them and seeing where they were now and trying to look at them in 2025. And it looks like the FSB and the security services of Russia basically infiltrated that whole group for about 10 years and destroyed it. I think Putin learned about the dangers of dissent very, very, very well. Russia did it during the Afghan war, and they look back and they said, we're not going to allow this to happen again. And any kind of dissent, any kind of rebellion is now completely crushed, because Russia was actually had more freedom of speech then. It actually had newspapers and press before 2022 than it does now. And the only reason they can convince the population to carry this on is because it's become like North Korea, whereas before it was still totalitarian, but now it's fully North Korean. You sing a song that's anti-Russian, you get thrown in prison. That wasn't the case before 2022. So that situation that happened in the Afghan war wouldn't even be possible now, because anyone even involved in that is either in prison or they're completely silenced. So the country has just become like completely blacked out in a very different way from the Afghan war, which is why people don't even know what's going on unless they hear their local refinery explode. So yeah, it's depressing though, especially coming back to the UK. I talked to journalists from all different backgrounds and on the phone as well. And I'm like, they're like, how is it in Ukraine? And they start complaining about how much it costs some British taxpayers. And I'm like, it is a few pounds a year. It is nothing to stop the literal invasion of Europe. But they've been convinced by Russian propaganda. It's so depressing.
Yeah, yeah, we're spending so much money on Ukrainian refugees. Yeah, it works like that. And for people who are unaware, they are easily triggered by those emotions, that Russian propaganda spreads out there. For people, they understand it like that. It's like creating some sort of the group of the people to hate. Like for Russians, those are Ukrainian Nazis. For maybe Donald Trump, those are crazy liberals. You understand everything.
Yeah, but I mean, there's so much of it. It's like the stuff that Phidias puts out that Elon Musk amplifies. It gets hundreds of millions of views, and people that aren't really engaged with politics see it all. They see a map and they say, "Oh, they speak Russian in the east of Ukraine, so it should be Russia." They speak English in Ireland, so obviously Britain should take that by the same logic. But nobody thinks on those levels. So it's really effective. It's really effective, but it works. It works everywhere. Friends that I've known for years message me, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know this was the case. Oh, isn't it pro-Russian?" When they see my Instagram reels, I'm like, for God's sake, it's really, really, really effective because Russia are the ones spending billions on propaganda. No other country is doing that. Ukrainian media ask me sometimes, TV presenters and producers, they say, Ukraine needs to be putting out counter propaganda. Ukraine needs to be putting out its own propaganda to counter Russia. And I think, no, propaganda inherently is a negative thing. And Ukraine doesn't have to lie to convince people that it's on the side of good. It just has to allow journalists into this country to tell the truth. Russia needs to lie because it knows it's not on the side of good. It's on the side of evil and it's doing something bad. So it has to lie to the world. So Ukraine doesn't need to be putting out any kind of propaganda. They just need to be as open as possible as a society from its internal government, with things like corruption, and then with allowing journalists in, which they're doing. So, yeah.
Caolan, and tell us, what are your thoughts about those peace deal negotiations happening? Like, is it for something, or will it change something?
No, I mean, Russia has no interest in peace. They're just trying to delay any kind of support for Ukraine. Whenever Europe tries to rally together and say, right, we're going to do an aid package, we're going to help Ukraine, Russia suddenly starts talking about peace again so they can delay it. And so they can have the Europeans say, oh, guys, hold on, wait, just before you send it in the post, just before we package these weapons, Russia might actually want a little bit of peace. Apparently, they want a ceasefire. Let's just hold on for a second, allow this to carry on for longer so Russia can take more land. It's literally nonsense. Peace negotiations. I mean, we had the reset button that Hillary Clinton hit with Sergei Lavrov back years and years and years ago before he invaded Crimea. And that was a reset of relationships. It was a positive relationship between Russia and the rest of the world, Russia opening up, Russia wanting peace. And then Russia stole Crimea, and Russia was rewarded for stealing Crimea by Europeans buying more Russian oil. So any kind of peace with Russia is a complete waste of time. And to the point where any security guarantees from Europe are a complete waste of time. Yesterday was the 31st anniversary of the Budapest Memorandum. And that was a security guarantee from America and Europe that this very thing now wouldn't happen. And look what happened. The ICBMs, the nuclear missiles, and the silos that I was filming in last year are gathering dust. So any security guarantee should be thrown out the window. Again, the only way that this stops right now is for Russia to be unable to continue fighting the war economically. They can't pay their soldiers, their refineries are all fucked up, and their boats are on fire in the Black Sea. Or Europe quadruples its support to Ukraine. There will be no ceasefire, no peace talks. The only scenario in which that happens is if Russia convinces all of Europe and America that they're genuine about some sort of ceasefire. Things freeze for 6 months, Russia gets its act together, they do a new mobilization, they rearm, and then they storm right back towards Kyiv and Dnipro like they did in 2022. Nothing will change. Russia's history shows this. So anytime you hear the word peace talk or ceasefire, just literally close your ears. That's how it should be seen. The words, whenever the Daily Mail or the Sun or the Evening Standard or CNN write headlines saying, peace talks, Russia wants peace talks, Russia wants a ceasefire, they are literally repeating Kremlin propaganda because Russia is completely uninterested in it. I don't even think they should report this stuff. I don't think they should be sending reporters to Istanbul and to any of these places. It's because it's irrelevant. It's nonsense. It's not worth the paper it's written on. So no, I don't even listen to these things anymore,
Yeah, I agree with you. Because there were already like guarantees. Some people say like Budapest memorandum, it just memorandum worth nothing. But Ukraine agreed to give up nukes for that. There were at least some paper signs, so intention to guarantee security for Ukraine. So if Ukraine gives up that, please guarantee it, at least with weapons. But no, we see the other picture, and that creates this very bad move, because other countries may understand that the only guarantee for them is not even NATO, it's about nuclear weapons, and they will start to attempt to acquire nuclear weapons, and that will create more nuclear countries that will bring in its turn more instability and potential nuclear conflicts in the future. So what our allies or partners, they did is basically they put at the brink this sort of outcome, for the world, for the countries to understand that there is no organization, community, alliance that may 100% guarantee something, because there could be some leader elected, like it is happening in the United States, who might say, no, we're going to make peace with this aggressor, and we do not have the difference between aggressor and victim. For us, it's deal. Let's make a deal to earn more money, but they are just being outplayed by KGB actors. So yeah, this is kind of the dangerous way we are heading towards to.
Yeah, it feels like that. Ukrainians and Estonians, to an extent, it's the only country that actually knows what Russia is about and what Russian mentality actually is and how to fight it. No other country really understands it. The further away you get from Russia, the further it is to explain to a person where they live what Russia actually is and their intentions. All Ukraine needs is ammo and weapons and the finances for it. They know exactly how to stop this. Ukrainians have been fighting this since 2014, since way before that. They know exactly how to defeat Russia. They just need the support to do it. And you could see that spray painted on the walls of Druzhkivka when I was there a couple of weeks ago, a town that's next after Konstantinivka. And it was spray painted on shelters and on the sides of the streets, saying, we don't need boots on the ground. We don't need anything. We just need ammo. We just need weapons. We just need support. That's it. And that was really sad to see. But that's it. And if Europe don't send Ukraine these weapons, they will have to use them somehow in the next decade or two, because Russia won't stop. So you're going to have to use them against Russia anyway. Would you rather it's Ukrainians that fire the weapons or your own population that fire the weapons? Just make a decision.
Yeah, that's right, Caolan. And Caolan, just to finish this, what are your next plans, like in Ukraine? Will you stay in Ukraine? Will you go back to Ireland, or how do you see your future career perspective as journalist influencer?
Well, I think here, I've been here for a year now. I have no plans to leave. I'm going to keep going to frontline cities. Zaporizhzhia is underreported right now. I want to go there before Christmas. I've got loads and loads of videos lined up. I'm going to do a video about how the Carol of the Bells, which is obviously a Ukrainian song. Everyone around the world who's listening to it right now on American radio, on your car radio, when you're driving home from work, should not just think of Ukraine, but the fact the composer of that lived from 1904 to 07 in Pokrovsk when he wrote that song, and had some rail workers perform some of it as well there. And to think of not just Ukraine, but think of Pokrovsk whenever you're driving around for Christmas or in a shopping center and you hear that song, to think of what's lost and the culture and the music and the art and everything in the Donbass. And then next year, we'll see what happens. I have no plans to leave this country. I've become A, completely in love with Ukraine, but B, there's still so much more to report. I want to do investigations more into the kidnapping of Ukrainian children, especially the ones that are now being sent to North Korea. And I want to do more confrontations with people like Phidias that I want to line up, who are spewing this kind of garbage and propaganda wherever they are in the world. And then probably spend the next few decades combating and looking at what Russia's doing to the rest of the world. I went to Syria this time last year and interviewed the victims of chemical attacks in Duma just after Assad had fled to Moscow, and showed how the Russians were involved in that and how everyone was interrogated and flown to Moscow before The Hague and interrogated. So places like this are just showing the tentacles of evil that Russia's exporting around the world, because it affects almost every corner of the planet, and not just Ukraine. So that's the future, I think.
I see. Well, thank you, Caolan, for visiting today's podcast. I hope to see you in the future also on our show. And yeah, I wish you to be safe out there. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for visiting.
Yeah, thanks for having me.